Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Anthony Peake's Consciousness Hour. This one is going to be a very interesting one. I always say that. I have to say I always fall into cliches all the time. But this is going to be a particularly interesting one because our guest today is a gentleman called Steve Mera. And Steve and I have known each other for many, many years. And we have many, many personal contacts in the sense that both Steve and I were involved in on a regular basis with BBC Radio City in Liverpool. It's actually Radio City and BBC Radio Merseyside, and also we've done quite a few events together over the years, including a splendid event up in Stirling in Scotland a few years ago as well. Now, Steve is somebody that is a fascinating guy. The amount of work he's done over the years is simply extraordinary. The books he's worked on has been extraordinary. But on top of that, Steve kindly invited me to record a series of 9 45-minute videos which we recorded a few weeks ago up in Manchester in his state-of-the-art studios up there, which we're looking forward to being released probably at the end of the month. Maybe if we get the opportunity towards the end of this chat, we can discuss that in greater detail. But firstly, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Steve, in that his background and everything else as well. And he spent almost 40 years as an investigative researcher of UFOs, the paranormal and other topics. He's the head tutor for British and US investigators training courses in ufological studies, and he's the CEO of Phenomena magazine, the world's largest e-zine of its kind, distributed in 12 countries and in 4 languages to over 1.8 million subscribers. And again, if anybody's interested in this magazine, please check it out. It is really good and it's totally free. It's incredibly well put together. He's also an accomplished author of several books: The A to Z of the Unknown, Strange Happenings, Paranormal Insight, The Rochdale Poltergeist, and The House of Fire and Whispers, for examples. He is the founder of the scientific establishment of parapsychology, which was established in 1996, and the chairman of MAPIT, Manchester's Aerial Phenomena Investigation Team, established in 1974. He's a freelance journalist, international lecturer, and the official spokesman for the Fox TV series Outcast, On Wings production, Travis the Movie, Hammer Movie Productions, The Quiet Ones, and The Other Land of the Gods documentary. He's partner advisor for the Zohar Entertainment Group and director of Zohar Global Group. And he's also director of Awakenings Expo UK and executive producer of the Chariots of the Gods 50th anniversary. So the amount of things that you've been involved in is extraordinary. So Steve, just as something's always fascinated me as well, and I know we discussed this when I was up in Manchester when we spent that incredible week together, but can you tell me a little bit about why it is that Steve Mera as an individual has got involved in such extraordinary work?
My father. My father was a UFO investigator, so
Wow.
I kind of followed his tracks really. And when one of my friends at school reading comic books and things, I was tucking into Erich von Daniken and Brad Steiger, and I found them absolutely fascinating. So I got into the subject after leaving school into UFOs. Did my first investigation in 1983 in Liverpool, I spent probably about the better part of 12 years in UFO studies until I pretty much I'd pretty much learned as much as I possibly could, exhausted that study because there really wasn't much available. And then I got into the paranormal and parapsychological stuff. And then, of course, psychology. And then from that, I formed the group SEP. Now, what's really weird, we talk about these coincidences. Yeah, I was no stranger to UFOs as a child. I had a number of experiences as well as paranormal. And the first time my mother and father decided to report a silver craft which was over our house for about 30 minutes, hovered above our house, I was about 12. And the person he reported it to was a guy called David Rees, who so you talk about these coincidences. He ran an organization which had been going since 1973. And this guy came out to interview us as I was 12. And my mother and father also said what they saw. And David Rees run an organization called MAPIT. And it turns out I ended up taking over MAPIT in the late 80s after David had passed away. And I run it now. I still run it now on behalf of David's work since 1973. So it's, again, strange coincidences. The guy that comes out, I end up running his organization, you know, so full circle. I mean, I've investigated anything that I would consider profound human experiences. In a tidy word section, I'd say profound human experiences, because there are so many different things. And rather than littering the table with all these different subjects, I'd just call it that. And for me, it was about advancing the studies. UFOs was just static. You know, we've gone as far as we can. What people were taught by, well, what I was taught by my mentors was complete nonsense. But at the time, fitted, just like many things do in school when you learn certain things. And the same for paranormal. You know, that was also very static and misconstrued. So for me, it was about breaking it down, looking at the mechanics of each side, and trying to come up with areas of new research and new theories to push us forward in the subject, because you know we can all add another photo or video to the mountain we've already got. And I really wanted some answers, you know, and it's taken a long time to a nitty gritty research and experiments and, you know, things that go on for long periods of time, but it really does deserve that effort, rather than playing around on the outside circle, just taking details. And for me, it's been rewarding, because I feel like we've got into new areas of research now that, you know, people are engaging with, and it might deliver some new answers to some of the subjects that were all considered quite profound.
I think that's very true. I mean, one of the things that coming from the Merseyside area myself, I've always been intrigued as to why there does seem to be such an area of focus round the Mersey area and the Wirral in particular as well. And I've always wondered why that is, or could it just be that you focus in on your own area and that's where you think it's going to be? But it's intriguing that your father was involved in ufology, so he must have been involved in right from the early days then, I guess.
He was. I mean, he was interested in the subject when I was, you know, a baby, and I remember being about 2 or 3 years of age, sat on some hill with my mother and father at night with a blanket on the ground, looking up at the stars. Never knew what I was looking for. I was only about 3 years of age, but it turned out I was sat actually on a hill on the top of Warminster, where all the stuff was going down. So, and I didn't know at the time. I was I was only very young, you know. But I have recollections of that. So it's always been part of my life, and I grew up in with having experiences, and so it's just life for me. You know, it was never very unusual until I started questioning exactly about what it really represents. You know.
Mm. I think when we had our discussions in Manchester, you know, we touched upon these subjects quite a lot, and I think what we'll do is we'll drill in a little bit, and really start to be drilling deeper and deeper into the subject. But for a start off, you know, particularly after we've just had the big event of the BIX competition and everything else as well, I was wondering, in terms from your point of view,
Yeah.
your research, what evidence do you think is that there's an afterlife?
Well, it's very difficult to obtain evidence, because what we've done is that the parapsychological departments have dealt themselves a get out clause, and how this basically works is, because I've been in many debates and talks with parapsychologists. I've even lectured alongside them, and it becomes very nitty gritty, because through experimental research we now know, and they know, that we can have communications with an intelligent source. The problems with all forms of intelligent communications is the element of deception. So that as soon as they realize that, yes, they'll in close circles, they'll hold their hands up and say, yeah, okay, we accept the fact that there is communication with something which of intelligence. Sometimes they tell us these things, or sometimes they tell us they're family members, and but bottom line is there's a high amount of deception and trickery involved, just as there is throughout most of the subject. And once they realized that, it was the matter of, well, we can never trust what we're actually given information. We can't trust that the information is authentic. Could be being told exactly what we want, you know, what they want us to hear. So that was a get out clause for them. It's like, well, how do we ever prove afterlife if there's this shroud of deception that's involved. Because there are many people who come forward and say, well, you know what, I had these experiences, this is what I was told. But we always relying on that information being authentic, correct, without elements of deception. And we can't rule that. So if we can't rule that, then they'll take all the greatest and best information and put it in the same basket, which means that no matter what we will ever present on the table through scientific research and experiments, it will always be considered as a non-element to prove of afterlife, because of that. Though that if we wanted, what's probably best is to target them in regarding the evidence, in regarding intelligent communication with unknown sources. That, absolutely. But nobody presses them enough on that, because they've tried to wrap it up in this old terminology of instrumental transcommunication. And it's something from the latter days of the 60s and 50s, and it's kind of been pushed out the scientific door. It hasn't, but they've managed to try and make it look like it has. There's still some very significant research in instrumental transcommunication going on. You just don't hear about it, much of it. Enough evidence there to support, yes, there is communications with unknown sources, but the elements of information is unknown if it's authentic or not. So we end up in back full circle. So trying to press them on the afterlife scenario, is there evidence? They're just going to point out that, well, there's no evidence. And how can we possibly obtain evidence as well is one of those things. So it becomes a very grey area, excuse the pun.
Because one of the things at the moment, a future guest in this program is going to be Professor Michael Lee Sudduth. And Mike is a very interesting researcher in this area and a philosopher, a very, very rigid philosopher. And he and I have been discussing recently in quite a lot of detail on various Zoom calls about the idea of the double explanations that could be in terms of psychic phenomena. And the first one is, as you quite rightly say, there's the kind of the trickster element, the Joe Fisher idea of the hungry ghosts, and the idea that there's something playing with us in some way. But there's also the argument in terms of mediumship, for instance, where we're talking about things like super psi, and the idea that sometimes it might be a form of telepathy going on here, and that the entities in some way are using their telepathic skills almost to manipulate us and fool us into thinking that they know things that we don't know. And Mike made a very interesting comment. I'd be interested to have your opinion on this, because he turned around to me and he said, of course, if these entities can read our thoughts in some way, this is how they can tell us things. Like, a medium will turn around and say, you've been thinking about having your teeth done, or you've been worrying about this an awful lot. Great. And Doris is saying this. But if the whatever it is can actually pick up our thoughts in some way, it's reflecting back at us. And he made a very good point when he said, because you have to assume if this is Great Aunt Doris doing this, you've got to assume that Great Auntie Doris is also using telepathy, because Great Aunt Doris, when she was alive, wouldn't have known what your thoughts were. So why does she know what your thoughts are now that she's dead? And that's an interesting point. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, we conducted quite a hefty series of experiments. One of them, which was quite lengthy, was in regards to building up our communication methods with the source. This takes time. This takes a cohabiting between two parties, in a sense of speaking, and a hell of a duration of time. It could be, people can put it down to trust, energies, name it what you want, but it doesn't happen immediately. Just like Skull, it takes time. I am aware about the advanced stuff, the advanced stuff that went on after Skull, which wasn't documented. There's still a lot of things that aren't documented about Skull, the experiments, and we took it further into Project Phenomena Project. And after sustainability of communications to the point where no electronic requirements. There's no electronic requirements required. The voices are direct DVP, direct voice phenomena, always above you, funny enough, always up here. If you stand up, it's up here. If you sit down, it's up here. Don't ask me why, but it just is. we wanted to push and push and push until we got to the point where they would allow us to ask questions. It took about 14 months, to be
So
honest
just
with
to explain, so you're in communication with entities, with beings that are communicating with you using
you. Yep.
sound. You hear them, yeah?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And did the whole group hear these, or
Yes, yes, and they were allowed themselves to be recorded as well.
wow? Okay, can you tell us more about this? This is fascinating.
Yeah, the DVP, to reach that DVP connection takes a considerable length of time. It's the effort into it has to be at least 4 times a week. It's just constant, boom, boom, over and over again, and building upon what we've already got, to the point where we feel we're comfortable enough to be able to ask the question, most important question: can we ask some questions and gain responses from them? Because there has been lots of bits of communications backwards and forwards, but nothing in the way of, we want to ask a question, give us the information. After 14 months, we were allowed to, we randomly got information to say, you can ask your questions. So we devised 10 questions. Now, over the years, I've always had no problem putting 10 questions down. Never, oh, I can ask 10 questions and probably get the answer. No problem. I'd write them down dead quick. But the realism of this, Anthony, is that when I was asked to write these 10 questions out, I really had to sit and think about the response and the questions I was given, because for the first time, because of the realism of it, this could happen, I don't know if I wanted to ask certain questions and gain certain responses. I didn't know if I wanted the answer. For years and years and years, I'd strive for it until that very moment. And I thought, do I want the answer, and how am I going to handle it? Because I already knew at that time there could be deception involved. But then it's just like the internet, information and disinformation. But some elements might be true. And is this going to put my head in a bit of a spin over this? Anyway, I was very careful, took some time and formulated the 10 questions. The session for this was devised and planned with them. And
So they said to the entities, you said, how can we do this? And they
yeah,
responded.
they basically said we can ask our questions. But we went back a couple of times and said,
Can you just give us a bit of background? I'm trying to visualize the scenario here. So there's a
okay,
group of researchers,
yes,
and communication channels have been opened with
the
other
source.
beings, like
Well,
the
we don't call it, we call it the source.
the source. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
And how does that first happen? So do you get a group of people together and then you say, "Are you there?" I mean, how
Well,
do
it doesn't
you
work
start the
then.
communication?
Yeah, I mean, it starts off by having the right people, because it's like fine tuning a sound fork. You've got to have the right frequencies and energies in that environment. You might bring somebody in and it's just not responsive, it's not very good. Then we say, okay, well, let's remove that person, let's try somebody else. And we have to keep shunting around and measuring our feedback to find which is the highest the capabilities achieved with the people that we've got involved. Eventually, we will find our sitting. That is our circle. Okay. So once you've got that, then you've got to build upon it. There's obviously elements of trust. That's what they said is elements of trust. And of course, it's got to be the right conditions, environmental conditions. And when I say environmental conditions, I mean even weather-wise has its effect. Okay, so it's all sorts of things that are taking place. They were taking place between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning, always between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning, under certain weather conditions. In other words, we were best achievable under what I would say was around about 50 degrees, clear nights. Those were the best conditions. You start getting stormy nights and things. There was a deterioration in communication standards. So we outlined what is the best to achieve. And then we continued working on that until we started building upon building communications from not just one source, which sounded like a particular voice, to 2 sources, to 5 sources, to 10 voices.
So coming back, when you had the first incidents of communication What happened?
The first instance of communication were open channel randoms. These open channel randoms are just things that you can't put a story to. You can't understand. It's like you've just took a snippet of a sentence they've said. It means nothing, but it's clear, it's precise, and it's recorded on recording devices. We didn't hear them at the time. It took some time to reach DVP standards, but so we were doing it through instrumental transcommunication standards, to the point where we have random answers to certain of our questions. Random. Sometimes it would, sometimes it wouldn't. Is it better with some people? Well, whatever these sources are, is it better for a female than it is a male interaction? You know, who's asking the questions? You know, there's a lot of things, and until we do a lot of mechanics and work out this is the best approach, and this is how to do it, this is when to do it, and we have to keep going and going and going to see how much we can amplify the communication. It does amplify over a period of time. The communications went from, say, one individual, which started off with a female, to males, to interactions between them being recorded. In other words, they're having a conversation between themselves being recorded. So it doesn't involve us. It's like you're recording their side of things. Until we had multiple, until the point where we had so many, we were unaware of how many were there, and we were told up to the hundreds were there, were present. On some occasions, we had noises being recorded as if there were a lot of people there. Sometimes it wasn't, but then when it got to DVP, it was more controlled state, because you were direct sourcing with an individual as opposed from an open forum. And that's when, as soon as we started coming through like a dog barking and scratching noises to begin with, that's what the DVP started at. It sounded like, was that a dog? Was that a dog I just heard? Or was that a scratching sound? Or was it a cough, a scratchy cough? And it was actually words that were trying to be formulated. Eventually we get to words, and we keep building and building on that until the clear sentences that can not only be recorded, but you can also be heard by all parties included. And they were always above us. The sounds were always from above us.
So this is interesting, isn't it? So it's suggestive that the voices have a source, and they are causing vibrations within the air, which therefore brings about sounds.
Yes.
So wherever they are able to manipulate the environment around you to manifest sounds, which are then so real that they are picked up on a recording device. I'm just trying to get
Yeah, these sounds are within. These sounds were being purposely. The DVP was purposely set out within the harmonic range for us to allow. At first, sometimes we didn't record them, because though that we were hearing them, this led off into the studies of transplacement. We'll get into that. It gets complicated.
Okay.
But, we were trying to figure out how can we hear these things and then record and not record them, which was odd, because we thought, well, we all heard it. So then we realized, obviously, what was happening is that we're being used as instruments, in the sense of being just as the recording devices were. We did ask sometimes for the recording devices to allow them to be recorded, and they were. Sometimes they were recorded without us hearing them. Sometimes they were recorded as if normal harmonics were generated from the DVP. In other words, 20 to 20,000 hertz was recorded in air, which the recorders picked up. So we could, not only did it record them, it recorded our response to hearing them, you know, which was a good thing. So, and our recordings were in there embedded within. So it was obviously embedded within a dual harmonics. They're them talking and us talking. Because sometimes just our response, we overlaid their response. There was an interruption, and we kind of hear both them talking and our interruption. So we go. It's all down to, you know, analysis and tests carried out. So once we'd achieved DVP on a permanent, regular basis, we wanted to assure that you carry on that until we can get another shot, so that we can ask, can we be able to ask some questions and wait for a response. It took some time, but we were told, it just came out of the blue actually on the third sitting after that, that you can do your questions. So we decided to do as a female voice. So we said, okay, well, we're going to do the questions. And it got to this point where I'm trying to write out these questions. What the hell am I going to ask now? Now I've reached a point of realism and can I handle the answer? But still knowing that obviously I don't know if it's going to be truthful or not. It could be information and disinformation there. It's just, and we were told when we could do this, we had to wait about 6 weeks. It wasn't just bring it in next time, it was about 6 weeks later we were told, we can go for it.
What the voices said, we're now ready to go.
Basically, the voices said you can now ask your question.
Wow. Okay.
And it was a lovely female voice. It was very mellow, very mellow female, nicey voice, really nice. So we did. So what we did is we went and got the paperwork with the questions, and we came in and we sat round and we were just about to ask these questions when a male voice comes in and gave us 10 answers. Boom, 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 boom. And we were sat there thinking, what's just happened? And I'm looking at this paperwork and I'm thinking, how did they know this? Were they watching me? Did they read the paper? And the problem is that I immediately realized, what if they read me? What if they knew the information to give me? Because it's already in my mind. I wrote these questions. And they were delivered without me even asking them by a secondary source, a male voice. And he delivered all 10 answers. And some of them were quirky, and some of them didn't really mean much, I said about realms, realities and stuff. Those within reach are 11. There was a response. Those within reach are 11. That was the actual words. Those within reach are 11. 11 realities? I don't know. It was just a phantom question to put in there because I didn't know what to put in there. You can't put in there things that are not checkable, really. It's really hard to do. But then you want to ask questions that aren't checkable because you wouldn't ask them if you knew. So we end up in this catch-22 situation of what the hell to ask. Anyway, there were some interesting things that came back. And we continued that work for quite some time to the point of materialization.
And just again, so just to get to the point, because we're now getting to the materialization point.
Yeah.
These were recorded. So you actually have recordings.
We have recordings, yeah.
And have those recordings been distributed to anybody, or have you
only for analysis? There was a couple that we put out, which were of Irish people, because we wanted to see if it really was an Irish accent, and it was an Irish accent. And the analysis shows that though that the sound of them are clearly a vocal response, the analysis shows that they're not vocal responses. They sound like vocal responses, but under analysis, there are no vocals being used, no frequencies set from human vocals there. It's a generated sound that you cannot identify the difference between a vocal DVB and a real person saying it using...
Can you just explain again the word DVB? What does that stand for?
DVP, direct voice phenomena. DVP.
Okay, fine. Okay, yes, sorry. Okay, DVP.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the DVP, we hear it. It can be recorded, but to hear it, sounds just like a normal person talking. But under analysis, it says it's not. It says under analysis that no vocals are being used. It's a synth sound. It's a synth sound voice. It's a synthetic voice generated. But they do it so cleverly that we can't identify it with our ears as synthetic. It sounds human vocals. But the analysis shows it isn't. The analysis can tell us the difference, which is generated from human vocals, because they're set through certain frequencies are generated through that, or if it's a synthetic sound that's been recorded and sounds like a human voice. That's what we were getting. Yeah. When I mentioned about the transplacement, when we were being utilized, because when we were hearing things in a group and confirming with each other exactly what was heard, which was all the same, these devices sometimes wouldn't record it. It's as if they were being demonstrable and they were teaching us, because we were curious, how does it work, asking questions and things, and we do know, that in some cases, blueprints, as they said, are made upon their side. Blueprints are made on their side of our environment to help with interactions.
What? So they create
Like a
a
blueprint,
model of our environment within their environment.
yes, which allows them to manipulate some of the things in our environment a lot easier.
Okay.
Just some of the questions we asked. I mean, we end up asking one of these questions formulates into asking another 10 about that one answer. You know, it's problematic. What we did find is that the placement of us hearing things, they were utilizing us as equipment. We didn't realize at the time, which really take a sidestep as a new phenomenon, really recognized into parapsychological research as transplacement. As we are being used, they transplace things. So on recording devices, we could run them simultaneously. This was whilst we were being monitored and sponsored by Olympus. It was their equipment. It was equipment, it was only devised to record human vocals, 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Anything above or below that, it shouldn't record. The recording devices didn't record things, and sometimes we heard them. On other occasions, three absolute identical models were recording for only 10 seconds. And we had three, this was done on purpose, by the way, as a demonstration. We had a female voice on one, a male voice on the second, and pops and clicks on the third, in a 10-second burst recording on all three in a silent, complete silent environment. None of us heard anything. And yet they would be able to demonstrate that a male voice could be on that one, a female on that one, and pops and clicks and unusual sounds on this third one. They were demonstrating to us that what they're doing is they're transplacing on the targeting equipment. They can put this on that, on this one, on that one, and this one on that one. Now, when they're doing that, what happens is there's a field around very, very close to the actual recording equipment. And we know this because the tests we carried out went into underdome tests. And the vocal responses that we got back, there was a target frequency in there which identified the source being in the dome with the device.
Can you explain in greater detail? You explained it to me when we were chatting, when we were doing the recordings, but can you explain to the audience and to Sarah what you mean by underdome? Because this is really quite
well, there's a glass dome, which and we place the recording equipment inside the glass dome. Now, as you can imagine, if you're recording inside a glass dome and it's an external sound, it's suppressed, it's muffled. And we did tests where we talked outside the dome to the recording device, and you could hardly hear us in the distance because, you know, it was under the dome and it was sealed from us. The recording by them, the source, onto the equipment, when you analyze it, there's a trace element in the analysis to show that the DVP or whatever it was, the source recorded onto that equipment, the source was in the dome with the equipment, because it sounded like you got a peg on your nose. That's how they sounded. They sounded as if the voice had generated inside the dome with the device. So then we took it one further. We wrapped it up in 5 to 7 layers of foil to stop any strenuous signals coming in. And then we put it in a plastic tub and we put it under 2 feet of water with a brick on it to keep it under there. And again, they demonstrated that they could provide the source recording as if it's inside that sealed container under 2 feet of water. And the element of sound you can prove is in there because there's a trace, you can hear the difference. So we thought, okay, so the targeting very close to the location and the targeting the equipment from that location. That location is just like it must be about maybe this size. You've got a small recorder in there and it generates it around this recorder and targets that recorder only. In fact, you can ask them to put you can put 2 recorders in and ask them to only record onto one, and they'll do that. and not the other one. So that we know that we have the capabilities of targeting the equipment. And then when it came to transplacement, when we are all hearing these, and yet the recording equipment in this case isn't recording it, we all questioned and thought, well, how are we hearing it? And we believe the phenomenon of transplacement is about them not having the capability to target equipment, but also to target us, the inner ear.
Yeah.
And enough information to present ripples, hair movement through the ear canal to generate enough information for the brain to hear sound. Now, we looked into the cochlear devices. These cochlear devices, amazing pieces of work they are. These are for people which have had hearing impediments or born deaf, those sort of things, not being able to hear. And they attach to the side of the head, direct source to the brain of the ear, back of the ear, and it bypasses the eardrum. In fact, the eardrum's not even being used, and it generates those frequencies into vibrations, which is passed down the inner ear, and the brain creates the information at the other end for you to hear.
Yeah.
So these are people which are not using their ears and they're hearing. This is what's happening with us during these conditions of transplacement. We're not hearing them. Our eardrums aren't vibration. It's inside. It's being generated within us, just like the cochlear device does. So now we can't rule out the fact when you have a couple of people sat there and saying, I've just heard my name being called. And other people might say, well, I didn't hear anything. Well, we can't throw that out anymore. We used to be able to throw out these singular experiences because, there's not enough information there to say it could have actually existed. But now we have to ask the fact is that sometimes the phenomena seemingly can target individuals to hear sound under unusual ways. And this mechanism might be very similar to how they're targeting the devices during the test, the Olympus test. And it was quite fascinating because we started to look into other areas of research here in the paranormal that might attribute what we refer to something to paraacoustics, and how things are manipulated or used for their benefit.
That is extraordinary. Sarah, have you got any comments or observations on this so far?
Not right now. It's not really my area of specialism, so it's just very interesting and technical.
Okay, Steve. So going back then, so what you're discovering here is that whatever the communication channels are, it's totally different to what we normally expect. It's not as if there is a sound source. The sound source can manipulate itself and can be anywhere inside an enclosed glass bell jar over it. So they can manipulate the location of the sound, and then we can manipulate our environment to make this happen. And again, the extraordinary thing is the way in which you can use these cochlear devices to make our brains react in a particular way. So as you rightly say, it means that certain people can be targeted and others won't even see it or sense it. But when you were talking before, you then start to lead in, and then you said then the visual stimuli started to start, and the apparition started.
It did, yes. That was the next stage. The next phase of the experiments was materialization and movement, to see if we could, if they could induce PK of some sort, or being able to move an item, an object. Yes, we achieved that. There were a number of things we achieved that. One of the most common things was to moving flowers, turning things in jars, moving equipment pieces around on the table by shunts. There wasn't a movement A to B. It was what you refer to as the shunt phenomena. It was shunt, shunt, and that sort of thing. It wasn't a steady, some obviously effort, different types of effort obviously involved, but certainly the movement of things being turned, which we got recorded on camera, and they would, we didn't notice it at first until we started looking, because it was happening so slowly, it could have been easily missed. And it was only because one branch of one of these plants had flexed against the other one due to the turn that it flicked. and it caught our eye. And then we realized that not just one thing is turning, the whole thing is turning. If you speed it up, you can see it move like this. But at the time, it's moving very, very slowly. But it is, in fact, turning a whole full 360 degrees upon request, which we asked for. And materialization was of coins.
Well, going back very quickly, we'll go to the materializations and the apports in a second. So this means effectively that these objects were being moved by a volitional force that was acting upon the object in three-dimensional reality, but effectively being facilitated by telekinetics somewhere else. Effectively.
What interesting was that during the experiment, it did have an EMF reading of 19 milligauss. I mean, normal background radiation was only about 1.1. You know, so it was about 19 milligauss during the and it lasted. The residue of that 19 milligauss lasted in direct association to the field around the object. It was literally,
so the electromagnetic field around the object was being affected by something.
After the incident, you could move that away, and this area was still affected somehow. There was a residue of that 19 milligauss.
So just to make that clear, so the object that had been moved, when you took the object away,
yes,
it was still in the area where the object had been when it was moved. There's a higher level of electromagnetic energy and radiation taking place in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. And it lasted for maybe a couple of hours at the most, and then it just slowly dissipated. There was a residue there for about.
This was registered on what? What was the machinery that was
tri-field meters, on two different various tri-field meters, and they were had been checked and correlated. So.
Wow.
So we got the information, and it was 90 milligauss. You know, it was the same reading on both for a duration just under 2 hours, and then it just dissipated. But I always question, actually, what is it we're reading? I mean, all right, there's an EMF there, but what is it? It's leaving the EMF. You know, I mean, it's something is happening now. We theorized this into the UFO phenomenon as well, because there has been locations where phenomena has been seen to materialize, and spikes of EMF have been read for a short duration of time in those locations, just like paranormal stuff. And we were trying to work out, I wonder if there's some physics we're unaware of here, that somehow when this phenomena rather appears or interacts with that environment, that it leaves a trace, a residue behind for a short duration of time. And of course, a lot more research has to be plowed into this, but we are trying to get answers as to what is it. I mean, you don't just get a random, 19 milligauss reading in an area like this for no apparent reading where it wasn't before, only apparently seemingly associated to the experience that's just happened. And we had things requested to be moved, and when they did shunt a couple of foot, again, the field just directly around this object was. We've got this on video as well. I can show you the video of this, and it's measurable. You can see the measurement, but it's short-lived. A couple of hours later, it just gets smaller and smaller, and it dissipates. It's like it goes smaller and smaller and smaller until it just dissipates. Because we took readings, and we've realized that we have to be closer to the point of where the object was to get that reading. And then as time goes on, we have to get closer and closer and closer. So whatever it is, it's seemingly getting smaller and smaller and smaller. As to what that is,
because that's intriguing, isn't it? Because ordinarily you would argue that it would dissipate.
Yeah.
It wouldn't shrink. It would dissipate into the atmosphere or whatever, into the ambient location around it. But you're saying that this field gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
Measurements every 20 minutes to do a measurement, it's getting smaller and smaller.
Wow.
After about 2 hours, it's just nothing left.
Wow.
And we don't know what it is. There's something happening in that environment to have that interaction. There's something interacts from maybe another reality, I don't know, and it's coming in and it interacts like this. And of course, when it's done and it's left this residue of that action over a short period of time. Now, there was the argument. I mean, I'm in a number of think tanks regarding the UFO stuff, and what's been seen within the inner core of ufology is these materializations of these objects have a lot of similarities to research and analysis of apports in paranormal phenomena. We're dealing with very similar physics that's seemingly involved, and that when these materializations happen, it's as if they're coming from somewhere where two things can't exist in the same space and time. So something is being taken from that environment. I mean, there's nothing, there's everything everywhere, isn't there? I mean, even in the hole this big, there's something in it, even if it's not gravity or whatever. There's something happening where what they believe and where we've worked in it that suggests there may be gravitational wells, very micro gravitational wells taking place in these areas where these materialize for short periods of time, which is measurable. They are measurable. You can measure these things. You can also use a ferrocell with a light, a laser light and a ferrocell to see the effects of magnetic on light. People used to say, oh, you can't bend light. We can with a ferrocell,
Right. So what we're saying here is we have a gravitational field taking place in a very small area that is an equivalent, almost like a micro black hole, where the gravity is being sucked in. And light will be bent round it because, of course, a gravitational field will bend light. We know from Einsteinian physics that light and lensing, that light will be bent around the gravitational field. And just to get my mind around this, so you're saying that there is evidence that light can be bent by these gravitational wells that are created.
What you've got to do is you've got to use a ferrocell, which is a lens.
Explain what a ferrocell is.
It's like the lights on the front of a bike. Those big old lights with a big glass lens in it.
Yeah.
Well, you have this about 6 inches away from your laser, and what it does is it scatters the light to the rim of the ferrocell.
Right. Okay.
Now, if you approach that ferrocell with a magnet, you will see the light bend towards the magnet.
Got you. Okay.
That's the sort of thing you can, because to actually bend light would take tremendous amount of gravity. It's just
absolutely that was my thought. The gravitational source must be extraordinary to do.
It would have to be, but when you watch it around the ferrocell, you can actually buy a magnet, and you can put it near the ferrocell, and you can see it leach towards the magnetics, the light from the edge of the ferrocell. It allows us to see the light bending under those conditions. So we thought, okay, so what if things are set up in certain environments where phenomena takes place on a regular basis to see if there are anomalies? This is where we currently are in Project Doorway, which is another project we're involved in. We've been to a number of places around the world regarding where manifestations are taking place. Also, funny enough, it's also places where there's acute paranormal activity taking place as well. So it's seemingly one of the same, so we kind of.
So which locations?
We've introduced
which locations are you talking about here? This is again intriguing. I know it's slightly tangential, but
yeah. Well, we've been to about 9 different states in the US. The last place we're supposed to be going over to Norway, but obviously we have some flight restrictions recently. So, but that's the next place to go. We came back from Malta in September last year. That was one of the last experiments that were carried out in the Hypogeum.
So you went into the Hypogeum in Malta.
Oh, yeah, we did.
You got access to the Hypogeum.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Wow, tell us more.
Interesting place.
Yeah, you can never get in there normally. I've tried about 4 times.
Now I'm into it. That's right up my alley.
Great.
Well,
Good.
a lot of our work, Sarah, actually does involve ancient sites, because there are key elements at ancient sites which our ancient ancestors were utilizing locations and terahertz frequency coming from the sun, be it the setting sun or the rising sun. That's where you get your terahertz frequency from, entering into chambers and creating frequencies. 2 forms of frequencies is a double lock system. You've got the on being generated by these people sat in alcoves in these ancient buildings, these resonant chambers, generating the om to match the resonant frequency of the building. In the center, you have the individual sat there with the terahertz frequency light on solstices or equinoxes coming down and hitting them. So you've got the frequency of light, you've got the frequency of sound, you've got this kind of double lock system going on. And unfortunately, the downside is that, yeah, we still have the terahertz frequency from the sun rising and setting, but it's very difficult to get the right ohms because, you know, some of these places are using Guru mantra, and you can't even use Guru mantra. We don't even have enough vocals. You know, something like that has to be trained for most of the lives from young to adult to be able to produce a Guru mantra. And secondly, so most of us don't even have enough vocal cords to produce these things now. So they have to be artificially induced, which isn't always the same. And we realize that these locations are tied in to phenomena, how phenomena is being utilized, and what we're finding within the phenomena, which ties them to certain locations, especially magnetic anomalies. It gets very complicated, and I can't get into it all, of course, in this time. But we did get into the hypergeum, and it's an immense place. What you see is about 10%. If you put onto the internet, the hypergeum in Malta, all you will see visually anywhere is 10%. There's another 90% all over down there. And now the whole place was, when it was originally found, it was full of elongated skulls, by a civilization that never.
Can you restate that again? When you were in the hypergeum, you were in a location that had lots of elongated skulls in it.
No, when it was originally found, it was full.
When it was originally found, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
These skulls were from a civilization that didn't even live there, never lived on the island. They only went there to build what they wanted to do and visit the temples. And they didn't actually live there. There's no ancient civilization living there. No history at all. The frequency of that location is so precise, and it's 111 hertz precisely. Now, what we're finding under that, what is really interesting, is that in certain locations of the hypergeum, under those frequencies, it heals. It's a healing frequency, amongst other things. The healing frequency, what scientists are saying now, is that under those conditions and under that frequency, your external wounds will heal 6 times faster than they should do under normal conditions, because of the location and the frequency that you're actually induced to. So it had a number of things that the hypergeum was responsible for. That was just one of them. But it's finely, very, very finely tuned. And we look around and you see all these quirky outlays and cuts in rocks and all sorts of things. But what we're realizing is that it's been so finely tuned that a simple cutout of a 1 foot deep by 1 foot wide square would change the whole building, would change the frequency. It simply is that attuned. So when we look at the displays in there and say, well, why did they cut this unusual piece out? Because it was balancing, it was fine-tuned. We find the same things in the unfinished pyramid of Giza. But I argue the point, well, it might not be unfinished. It might be finished. It's just that it seems to be unfinished, but we was fine. It is measured at exactly the same frequency as the Great Pyramid. So maybe it is finished.
well, actually, on that example, Steve, I mean, this is interesting, isn't it? That if somebody entered your recording studio up in Manchester, the Manchester area, and went in where you have all those incredible cutouts and that strange surface area around to make it the echoes not stop. If you weren't knowing what you were looking for, you would misinterpret that, wouldn't you? Completely.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You would think, this is unfinished. They played around with this, but they don't know what they're doing. You know, they've got these rough edges.
This is the biggest problem about our ancestors, because we can all go and dig up bones, you know, and we can say, oh yes, they were this, they probably died at this age, they lived like this, they were this tall, and da 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 da. But what we cannot tell you ever is the consciousness of these individuals, the spirituality, you know, how they thought, what did they experience sensual wise, I mean, I'm sure they had far more sensory inputs than we do, because they were aware of natural frequencies. Even just probably even the human frequency from planet Earth itself, which does come into play in some ancient sites. I mean, we realized that very quickly when it came to deep underground bunkers during the Second World War. And after long periods of time, scientists couldn't function properly because they had to artificially induce infrasounds from the human resonance, because we're disattached from our is our connection with planet Earth, and over long periods of time we need it apparently. So
Sarah, I'm immediately reminded here of Dracula.
Oh, that's exactly what I was thinking. Highly unfeng shui in Drakelow tunnels, I would say.
Unfeng shui. I like that. Yeah, anti feng shui. Yeah.
So it's what we found is these correlations between the UFO phenomena and the paranormal phenomena. And to do that, we had to break down all the walls, Anthony. I mean, it's as simple as that. But there has been a ruse. I absolutely guarantee there's been a ruse for many years about formulating the sci-fi idea that aliens, extraterrestrials are all coming from all these different planets. They're traveling the vast distances of space to come visit good old Earth and us Earthlings. They all love and light, and they all care about us, And there's been this ruse ever since Roswell, and it's been building and educating and swamping us everywhere. No matter where we look, what we read, what we do within this subject, it's there. It's ever present. It's in the movies, it's in the TV shows, it's in the food range, it's in the clothing range, it's everywhere. That, I believe, was done purposeful, because the true phenomena lies more within the PSI and the supernatural than I can ever tell you, to be honest with you. There are a lot of things I can't publicly say, which hasn't been released yet, through experiments and research. But there are higher parties that know this, that is far from what we ever thought the extraterrestrial hypothesis actually represented. And we just can't get into it because there is so much manipulation of perception. And there is fundamentally, there's a system. Can I say this? Yeah, there's a system called the YARS system. Can't get into it too much. The YARS system is probably one of the most sophisticated AI computers was utilized. It all started off with Jacques Vallée in 1985 when he started manufacturing one of the first AI computers, about concluding what all phenomena represents. I mean, all phenomena worldwide, from cryptids to the strangest cryptid experiences to the strangest paranormal, strangest UFO, you name it, all. And the idea was to feed all this in for years and years and years, specific, detailed information of events, thousands of events all over the world. And then ask the computer, what's the conclusion? That conclusion came back some 2 years ago. And the conclusion was that we are dealing with a singular source that has capabilities of physiological constructs. Think about that. That's quite an interesting sentence it comes up with. A single source with the capabilities of a physiological construct.
In other words, it's a simulation.
What's the single source? Now, how did it get to a single source? Yeah. It's because it can go middle of Alaska in a little town known barely by anybody on this planet, who have an absolute identical paranormal story. And I mean, the physics and the little mechanisms of the paranormal events they experience match absolutely exactly the same to an incident that took place in California a few years later. There are many mechanisms around, but why should a different country, different belief, different structure, the mechanisms are the same? No matter where you are on planet Earth, the mechanisms remain identical, and they should vary. They should vary through cultures, spiritual changes, all sorts. There should be hundreds of variations. There isn't. When we get look at the mechanics of apportation in Alaska and look at the mechanics of apportation in the UK. They're identical. There's no difference. This mechanism, there's a mechanism, a rule book, there's something guiding, controlling. It must be a hell of a job to do. And what is the source? I do not know. But it didn't name the source, but it demonstrated how it came to the conclusion that there was a single source for all this. And sometimes it gets it wrong. Sometimes, you'll have little grey men of little greys running around, enjoying a contact experience, but they get it wrong because the craft looks smaller than what them can get in. The craft has round portholes and rivets around its side. It doesn't look like it could even lift off the ground, let alone travel through space. Sometimes the mechanism doesn't get it right. And there are times in not just a UFO, the cryptids, the paranormal, it has a mechanism to play out. But what happens if we throw a sabo in the works and we sabotage it, where we don't run from a phenomena? There's a giant werewolf creature chasing 4 people, and suddenly one of them falls to the ground in absolute fear. And this creature runs up, and what's it do? It doesn't know what to do. It's not control. It's no mechanism for that. It's all about the fear. Like poltergeists, it's all about the fear. But what happens when you freeze? That instinct takes over you to say, don't move, because you might not be noticed, so freeze. And this guy's frozen to death in fear, as the term goes. This thing's like, what do I do now? Well, what did he do? They run away. Time and time and time again, they always run away because there's nothing else to gain from the incident. And this is a mechanism of how also the affecting paracoustics, they're generating exponential sound 10 times more than what it should be for the fear frequency, and all that's being utilized, just as the paranormal does. The paranormal can amplify sound to make something fall from the wall sound 10 times louder, so you capture it on your equipment recording downstairs. Try replicating it, you can't reach that decibel level. Exactly the same thing in the cryptids. Everything is connected. There's a string of mechanism runs right through the UFO, the cryptids, the paranormal, and there's a control. There's this kind of a rule book or something. So what we're trying to do is look at this now as a whole with the think tanks we're working with around the world, and trying to put information together. Is that one thing is for absolute certain, we've come so far now that, and the government, US government are aware of this more so than the UK probably, is that we definitely know it's far beyond what we ever thought, this phenomena. It has multiple masks. It's been utilizing and working with and interfering with humanity, probably predating history. It's always been present. In fact, it might actually be a terrestrial phenomenon. But whatever this is, the mechanism is huge. The control is unknown, is what the source is, but it presents itself in a way that far exceeds the boring extraterrestrial hypothesis. In fact, I think Jacques Vallée said that he'd be very disappointed if it was just aliens traveling from some distant planet to visit Earth. All the fun's gone, and the evidence is pointing to much more like something like that. Some people don't want to work in the field. Sometimes this phenomenon has a sting in its tail, be it the UFO or the paranormal. If you push it too much, it can influence your life. And when I say the influence also consists of voices. It's been known as the influence. The watchers, the influence, it's ancient, old, but it can turn your lives inside out with negativity. It can make the worst things go wrong in your life, lose your dearest and nearest in plentiful forms. And this is what Robert Bigelow, who was involved with Skinwalker, is now talking about. Finally, after all these years, he's talking about, the negativity of, of being involved in those long-term experiments. Not just him, but others. And there is. There's a darker side to it. So there's not all love and light. And I've always expressed this during my interviews all around the world. I say it for what it is, whatever phenomenon it is. You know, it can appear to be good, it can appear to be bad, you know, but that's appearance. You know, what is at the core is what's questionable. And I like to say to people, you know, always be prepared, because you don't know what to experience. We're still learning. But I think we're edging closer and closer, Anthony. I think we are definitely edging closer to a better understanding of this worldly phenomena, which is interacting with us on a daily basis all around the world.
I think it's one of the things that I found absolutely extraordinary of spending time at your studios in Manchester was the amount of investment you've put in. Some of the equipment you've got in there is extraordinary, and some of the computers, because you're designing your own computers in there, you're designing your own virtual reality systems. You are doing some incredible stuff there. You know, really, really extraordinary, really, really leading edge. You know, and effectively anybody who gets the opportunity, you know, to check out a lot of Steve's work and his associates there, they are doing some extraordinary stuff. But one of the things that you've discussed with me, and you're involved in this Phenomena project. I mean, how did you get involved in it? Who is involved in it, or what can you tell us about it in terms of this? Because you've touched upon it slightly, and you've dropped in quite a few very, very interesting little smoke bombs here and there and everywhere, which I'm really intrigued in as to what's the background to it.
Yeah, of course. The background started with Skull. I mean, I was very aware of Skull. I was very interested in the experiments, the manifestations, and the looking at the materials and what actually went on. However, I was fortunate enough to have a back door in to communicate with Robin Froy directly, and my associates directly, where over a period of time, and I guess trust, we obtained information which you won't read in the books, which you will not read in reports of Skull, and the reasons why the Skull experiments came to an end publicly. And of course, there was the loss of the whole thing about having a circle is maintaining it, control. And there was a loss of control to it. There was dangers which were involved, warnings which were involved, and a rush of entities that invaded, is a better word, the sessions, to the point where they wouldn't and couldn't leave. They wouldn't, just never left. And Robin has mentioned to us that they never did leave. In fact, they never left him full stop since then. Though there were some continued experiments, the advanced section of Skull carried on for some time with a colleague of mine known as Nick Kyle. You'll know Nick.
No, Nick, yeah.
I don't know if he's talked to you about his when he was involved in some of the Skull.
He has indeed, yes, yeah, and he was on this show talking about it.
Excellent. So you were aware, obviously, the physical manifestation of UFOs appearing. And of course, the mass of light, the light which had mass to them. And you could capture these in your hands sometimes. The physical properties of being able to touch somebody who's not a real person. You know, so it was a demonstration of materialization and manifestation, which they reached, which was really good. It was actually better than some of the bits done in the original Skull, the advanced stuff.
Well, one of the things actually, while we're talking about this, continue to, because one of the things that fascinated me about the Skull experiment was the interface between the entities, whoever they are, that there's the little Irishman, and there were various other characters that they were communicating with from the other side, who were working on the other side to communicate with us here.
Yes.
And I was immediately reminded of a series of experiments that was done around about the 1890s called Imperator and Rector, which took place with a guy called Stainton Moses, during the auspices of the SPR. And the parallels between Skull and what was happening there was extraordinary.
Same.
It was very, very, it was as if it was the same group.
Same thing. Absolutely. And it's seemingly there's a similar pattern of these experiences. When you go down that road, it's seemingly the same sort of things appear, are having experience. And what was interesting is that I was invited. There were two new people that joined the advanced skull experiments, which Nick had been involved in, Nick Kyle. I was introduced to him for the very first time in Scotland. Nick asked me would I like to interview them? These are the two most, the best, he said, in Scotland, the physical mediums that were involved. And I did go and interview them in the restaurant. And my interview was cut short because they were sat on a table over another table, and my table started to move, and then my items on the table started to move, the plate and the fork and things like that. So as far as I was concerned, that was the end of my interview. You know, I didn't need to interview. I didn't need any more evidence than that these two people were very strong physical mediums. And they were actually introduced to those type of experiments with skull, which Nick was involved in. What we did then is that we came along and decided to take it from there into Phenomena Project. And Phenomena Project was to try and really lock down and really target the phenomena and its capabilities. Let's really look, instead of just saying EVP or DVP or whatever, what is it? How is it happening? How, if we really, really analyze the capabilities, let's see what range this phenomena has. Can it put it onto record? Can it put it onto record and not hear it? Can we hear it and not put it on record? Can we have them manipulate it, which will give us clues of their capabilities and their limitations, of course. And this is how it kind of came about. And Project Phenomena was running for about 6 years, run for. And we have 17 reports. 4 have been released, there's 13 that haven't yet. But we're waiting on further information.
Released in what capacity?
We released them to other departments, you know, other people which have been involved in these types of studies, because they were involved in studies, and we wanted to do parallels. We wanted to see if there are parallels between their research and our research. And there had been, we've got 2 back which were identical, like you said. It doesn't matter where you rear your head up on one side of the hemisphere or the other, the phenomena is seemingly the same. And it does seem to be, but it does have an element of trace backwards as well, because we can trace this back. It's just the mask just changes. That's all it is. It's just the same thing, but the mask is changing from era to era. Because we will have to look through historical reports to find out these people experiencing the same thing. It's just that it was identified or seen to be something different, when in fact, if you look at the mechanism doesn't change. That's what gives it away. It's the mechanism that gives it away, not the mask. The mask is confusing, you know, because we've been presenting masks forever as far as we're concerned. But the phenomena doesn't. That's how to trace it, is the analysis of the mechanism that is always at play, no matter how length.
Do you think the phenomenon? I'm one of the things that, you know, I'm fascinated with at the moment and working with a couple of other people on is a recreation of the Philip experiment. And I'm fascinated, as you know, in the egregorial and the idea of human collective anticipations of things can bring these things into existence. Do you think the phenomenon uses us in some way to bring itself through into this environment?
I do. I think there's a cohabiting. I think it's no different than, you know, manifestation of phenomena around the seance table with 5 mediums. It's no different than the C5 contact stuff with 5 meditators, all wishing for a UFO to appear in the sky. You know, this is what we tend to get, is these periods of this phenomena, and it's always the same. You know, it's the conjuring. Some other people will refer to as conjuring, the conjuring phenomenon. In witchcraft, it'd be referred to as conjuring. You know, conjure something, and actually, so much so that becomes its own sense, it recognizes its sense as a tulpa, in a sense of speaking. You know? But when things like that are manifested, it isn't a mockery. It's the real phenomena. It is the phenomena. It isn't something pretending to be, you know, and it can happen under certain conditions with the right people, the right places. there's these interactions that do take place, and they have been for a long time, but it's been involved in all circles, secret societies, in seance circles, in government experiments, in the UFO phenomenon, in the paranormal phenomenon. It's there. The mechanism's there for you to somehow congeal with of this, because the phenomena is intelligent enough to recognize the observer and the connectivity. There's a connection. It's a kind of a conduit in the sense of speaking. And they are aware of you, you are aware of it, and the information's going backwards and forwards. You might not be aware of it, but that is exactly what's actually happening. You know, the obtain information. The information that we were given through some of the experiments was that we now know as a certainty that they are aware, when I say they, that's whoever these entities are aware of events up to 18 months in advance. They may be aware of everything in advance.
Right. So how do you know this? That's a very interesting statement. So what evidence have you got?
Because we were told where we were going to be in 18 months' time and what we were going to be doing. And this happened on 2 occasions. And
tell us more about that. Are you allowed to tell us more about that? Because that's intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, during the Phenomena Project experiments, we were told that in 18 months' time, I would be sat in a building conducting an experiment in Seattle. I'd never been to Seattle. I'd never crossed my mind to even go to Seattle, to be honest with you. I had no connections there. And couldn't find any feasible reason why on earth would I be in Seattle in 18 months' time. And not only that, but sat in a house, whose house? I have no idea. I don't know anybody that lives over there, and conducting an experiment. And I have no reason why I would be even doing that. A series of events took place where led me to 18 months later to be in Seattle and sat in that house and doing that experiment. And that happened on 2 occasions, absolute certainty. So I do know that they're aware of at least 18 months. It might be longer, I don't know. You might be able to see all.
That's disturbing, isn't it? It has implications for your elements of free will, as we discussed extensively when we met up. Your elements of free will in the experimental protocols, because if the things that are being experimented upon already know the outcome of your experiments, as it were.
Unless you think of it as when they told me they created an alternate timeline for it to happen.
Yes.
As we've talked about, it gets very complicated in the quantum physics of things. But I can absolutely say, yeah, they are aware. There was a few unusual things. That was one of them. Another unusual thing is when we headed so well into communications, and then on occasion we'd be completely shut down by something referred to as lightertons. They referred to them as lightertons.
Lightertons.
Yeah, right. It's a very unusual name. I can't find any information anywhere on the internet about lightertons. But these were described as beings of light that know and see all. And when these came in during our communications, it was over with. That's it. Forget it. Let's walk away for a few days. Nothing's going to happen now. And that's exactly what happened. It was all shut down immediately. And whenever these things, and when these things turned up, there was a different vocal response happens.
Do you know what I'm thinking of here? I'm thinking of many years ago. There was, I think maybe we discussed this, that many years ago, when I was young, there was a Fantastic Four American comic, and it was called Enfant Terrible. My French is crap. I can't speak French. But the idea was there was this entity they were dealing with, and you suddenly found out that it was a child. And I'm just thinking, it's the same there. It's as if there's a group of kids communicating. You know, the little kids, and then suddenly mum and dad come in, and these lightertons, and mum and dad saying, "What are you doing?" So they stick you off.
It's exactly how it felt. It felt like they weren't allowed, they weren't supposed to be doing what they were doing, and now we could be in trouble because the big guys have come in and shut it all down. That's how we felt it was, and it was quite there was quite a slow coming back. And then, but it happened a few occasions, and these things were just boom, they're there all of a sudden, boom.
It's interesting, actually. Our mutual friend Peter Braun has actually just posted to say Lighterton character in the World of Warcraft.
Oh, is it?
Apparently, yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know. But I looked, I mean, we're talking years ago, and I looked all over for this word for Lightertons,
yeah.
and I couldn't find anything. But when we asked them, when we eventually got back to, because it was all shut down, but afterwards, it's seemingly the same crowd, I'm assuming, if they are in fact a crowd. We asked, what are they? And the reply was, they are beings of light, know and see all. And I thought, okay, all right, beings of light. And are they the police? Are they policing? Are they? I don't know. But it was very, very strange, and it happened a few occasions. But they without a shadow of doubt, they knew about 18 months into the future. I did a test over the telephone as an experiment. And it was one of those Akashic record experiments with the phenomena. Whilst this control session was taking place, I was going to be 100 miles away, and I was going to ring using the telephone to somebody in the session to ask one of these entities a question which should deliver to him, and he could relay it back to me of an incident that's taking place at my home at that time. So I would be doing something. I grabbed an object, and I said, okay, I want to find out can they see me? So of course, I'm on the phone, I'm talking to him, and he asked a question, and they said, yes, instantly, can see me. So they weren't there, or they were with me, one of the two. I'm 100 miles away, Anthony, right? So I said, okay, tell them what I'm doing. That's what I've got in my hand. And immediately as I asked, the response came back to him as, it's a pendulum. And I had my pocket watch in my hand, and I was going like this. I was sat in my bed upstairs on the phone. I said, what is it? It's a pendulum. And I thought, bloody hell, are they seeing this? Are they seeing this? Are they, is it instant information? And I thought, right, okay. Well, so we started to ask them, when we communicate with them, that led us to this question. When we communicate with them, are they there with us? And some of the time they said, no, we're elsewhere. There was one occasion where we were communicating with the source, where the source identified where it was, and yet it wasn't with us. So really, it puts the whole thing, throws out the window then, because when it comes to all the haunting stuff, rip it up, throw it away, because when you get an EVP in a haunted building and people are saying, oh, it's haunted, this building, because I've just got an EVP. No, might not be. You might be communicating with the source, but the source isn't in the location. So really, it holds the idea out the window then. We have to start back at the beginning. Does the source, when you capture an EVP in a building, does that building, is it because it's a haunted building? No, not necessarily at all. Apparently, according to their information, they can interact with us, the source can interact with us from a foreign source area, which has nothing to do with the location where we are.
Well, there is not.
Oh, sorry, Anthony. I was just going to say, it really reminds me of the idea of non-local consciousness and the fact that there's that entanglement going on between all conscious entities. Exactly,
because anybody catching EVPs to the standard we have would immediately say, this house is, oh my God, this house is haunted, and this is this rule of thumb of thinking. It's, oh, well, it's the environment. No, the source is here. The phenomena is right under our noses.
But again, if we apply geometry to this and we apply dimensions to this, It could be a location within the fifth or even sixth dimension of space-time, in which case every location in the previous level below in dimensional space is accessible from the higher dimension. So therefore, there isn't a concept of distance and space from that dimensional location whereby everything can be accessed from one point. And this then brings out some very interesting ideas, doesn't it, about what the location of the source is and the identity of the source. You know, again, we can move back, can't we, into quantum physics here and into the whole concept of tesseracts and hypercubes and everything else, you know, so that there's an area. What I'm really delighted about here and the things you've been talking about is that it really is showing now that we are really moving very quickly.
We really are.
Into some really interesting areas. We're breaking out of the old anecdotal, let's talk about ghosts, let's just reiterate the same old bloody stories about ghost hauntings, let's reiterate the same old stories about near-death experiences. That's not what I'm at. I'm at trying to, like you are, to try and understand it and explain it. Let's forget the anecdotes. Let's just start thinking about it objectively. And what you guys are doing, you know, and this is all I was really hoping with this discussion, because we very much touched upon this. And everybody, if you get the opportunity when the videos, when the 9 videos come out on Steve's channel, where I'm discussing each of my books, on about 4 or 5 occasions, you'll see the incident where Steve will say something and I'll say something. And you can see us both wanting to go off on a massive tangent because this is so interesting, but we couldn't. And now we're having the opportunity, and I'm so intrigued and excited about your work because it is so important. Now, one of the things you touched upon, I'm aware of time now because I knew it's going to run so quickly, but where do cryptids fit in? You mentioned cryptids. Now, for anybody who doesn't know the term cryptid, it's like abominable snowman or the Yeti or these entities that are non-human that seem to just appear. So where do cryptids fit in?
Well, yeah, it fits in simply because of the mechanics. I mean, I don't look at the front of the phenomena anymore. I pull back the curtain and I look what's ticking behind.
You see Oz at the back of the curtain.
That's it. It's
Jenny Randalls would say.
Yeah, I mean, this is what you see behind, and I'm used to seeing this now. This mechanism of stuff behind the screen. The screen is a kind of play part. Say, okay, what's going on there? And for me, it was about the manipulation of infrasonics and paraacoustics involved in cryptid incidents. Now, seemingly it was all, I mean, I even looked into fear frequency, you know, I mean, I looked into the fear frequency of infrasonics, I looked into fear pheromones. Now, what was interesting is that I was trying to figure out why is it so important, just like poltergeist infestations, that's another connection, by the way, with the cryptids. It's about fear.
It's fear.
Why is it all about generating?
As if they feed upon fear.
Okay, so I looked. Yeah, I took that fear and I thought, well, okay, what are they feeding on? What's going on during that process of fear? Well, your cortisone and adrenaline and all sorts of things happening internally. But what is it could be feeding from if that's all happening to us internally? And I started thinking, okay, is it a fear pheromone? Do we actually release pheromones in fear? Now I started looking into the research of this, and there's a number of scientists out there that say, look, you know what, we're disconnected from that all now. You know, we are the new human, you know, we new sapiens, second version of humans now. We don't need all that. We've got rid of it. I argued the point that might actually not be the case, because they say, look, we don't generate fear pheromones anymore, and we don't have the capabilities of sensing fear pheromone, you know, the smell of fear. But there had been some interesting tests done, Anthony, where they had some guys playing basketball, and it was only a few years back, and some guys doing skydiving for the very first time, and they were asked to wear these patches. So obviously the sweat would obviously go into these patches. And during a test, an experiment, They asked people, not very nice, I suppose, to smell these patches. Yeah, I don't know if I would have wanted to do that. And they were able to identify the skydivers as if as if they could smell fear. And it was. Obviously, all skydivers for the very first time, very fearful, jumping out of a plane. And the conclusion was, yes, we can identify fear pheromone. And I thought, but the scientists are saying we don't have it anymore. But so there's this argument going on. And I was trying to figure out, well, what's in it for the phenomena? What's it trying to do? Is it attracted to the fear pheromone? I don't know. Is it so to scare us so much that we have to reduce the level of it? Because everything else is chemicals that's happening inside us, adrenaline, cortisol, all sorts of things. The fight or flight response is kicking in. But then the mechanism, when it really wants to brief this up, what it does, it produces a number of things. The first thing is, through frequency, it can generate, believe it or not, a scent, smells. The human body can smell things generated from frequency and vibration. And what happens is that some people refer to the smell of sulfur at the time, which has been smelled in paranormal cases. It's smelled in UFO cases, these other combinations and the crossover.
I smell it before. I smell it before lightning.
Lightning, yeah. So it's sulfur again, yeah. So there's something going on there. Electrical charge in the atmosphere, electrical charge around individuals, local locations. Then there's the absence of sound, the Oz factor, the sudden area of complete nothingness. It happens in the paranormal. It happens in the UFO. It's happening in the cryptids. There's another connection. And then I started looking at the amplification of sound. I started interviewing people, and this is what they said. They said, look, you know what? We're used to bears. We're used to large creatures come crashing through the forest at us. Bears, sometimes. It's scary, but it happens. Bears do charge occasionally. We're used to all that. We've lived around here all our lives. But the sound sounds like there's a juggernaut coming through. It sounds like there's a herd of buffalo coming through. The sound, what they heard, is so much more amplified. The amplification of sounds of acoustics is paraacoustics. The amplification of sound is seen in the paranormal. We had this during experiments when we conducted huge big crash bang wallop. We go and investigate it. A picture's fallen off the wall. We look back, it's 72 dB that created. It doesn't matter if we replicate that picture falling off that wall. It'll only reach 13 dB, 14 dB. How did it get to that much? It's amplified on purpose for us to recognize the action. Phenomena can manipulate sound, just as the cryptid does in its area of location. It's amplification of sound. That's another paranormal trait connected to them. And the list kept going on and on and on, to the manifestation of apparitions with red eyes, or things with red eyes, and cryptids having red eyes, and and certain smells, disorientation. These are routes where people know it's been walking through the same route for all their lives, but during the experience, disorientation, they lose which way they're turning, they don't recognize the location, and until afterwards they kind of think, I don't understand how I got lost. Through the experience. It's as if it's done purposely to draw out the length of your experience in that environment to generate all that fear, just like poltergeist did. So we started to look, but the mechanisms behind it, Anthony, is the same mechanism. Just pull back the curtain. Don't mind if it's a cryptid, paranormal, UFO stuff. Pull back the curtain. UFOs are utilizing the same frequencies, the fear frequencies it's generating. It's generating frequencies which causes insects and things to fall quiet. That's your giveaway. All those famous films, even Spielberg film, suddenly all the crickets stop. Yeah. The Oz factor experience, boom, there's the mechanism behind is all the same. It's the same tune. And it's just the front of the mask is changing. So that's why I got involved in that, because of its paranormal and ufological attributes to that. It's seemingly all connected, all these things. Now, when people say, when I talk to the guys out, in Arkansas, and they said these are real creatures out there. I say, okay, fine. You know, I'm not going to rule. The rule of thumb is I'm not going to say it's not impossible. It's not impossible. It could be that there are some creatures out there living in jungles and things where we just don't go, that could be surviving like that. Fine. But there is also a phenomena also which manipulates itself. You know, I have cases where UFOs have been reported to come down on farms. The entities that are seen were throwing stones and banging big sticks against trees to make sound. This is a Bigfoot type thing they were doing. And yet we have all these crossovers of these. Sometimes it just gets all mingled up, but the play is there, and the utilization of what keys they want to press is there. And that's what I identify. I identify the mechanism. I kind of have to pull back the curtain, get all the nitty gritty little bits and see what adds up. And then I start to reveal the mechanism. And that mechanism is all right through the whole chain of, and I've gone back, you can go back hundreds of years to the fairy abductions and how the iron was a repellent for the phenomena, and how that, and then you can start going into the strange incidents regarding animals being taken all around the planet, and these things are allegedly responsible, and you go back, and then you can get into the thousands of years, you know. But this just represented slightly different. If it's not serpent gods, it's little Irish folk, the fae, the creatures. You know, there's I always look at the whole thing of it and say, look, we must have either there's over 2,000 varied entities from over 2,000 different planets traveling to Earth simultaneously all the time to have an amount of, was it one UFO seen every 8 seconds around the world? There should be a super highway backwards and forth, which would be easy to be identified. No, there isn't. Yes, we've got little bits, but no, there is no big evidence was. In fact, when people say about all the UFO and extraterrestrial hypothesis, it's the weakest. It's the weakest hypothesis. And yet so many people, haven't the governments done a good number on us? They really, really have. Because right from early days, it's like, make this. Yes. It's UFOs from another planet. Let's tell them this. That eventually they'll swallow it. Eventually we'll believe it. Eventually we'll accept it.
Well, it was like, you know, your associate Robbie and his book on UFOs, which he gave me a copy of, UFOs and Hollywood. And you can see how Hollywood has manipulated the extraterrestrial model to tell us that, you know, don't look at what I'm doing over here. Look over here. If they're aliens, they're aliens. Very true. It
is. But I think just like you though, Anthony, what you're doing is you're pulling the curtain back and you're seeing what's going on behind. And if you talk with enough people and their experiences and the people that are the scientist guys that are looking at the individual mechanisms, and you start to put all this together like you do, because not everybody puts all the dots together. But when you start doing it like you do, you see a mechanism. And that mechanism is the inner workings of a program. It's like everything I'm reading now, scientists are coming forward and saying now that the universe looks like it's some type of construct. I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? And to me, the more I delve into this, the more it becomes farther away than what we've ever initially thought it to be.
Yeah.
You know?
I totally agree. It's the more, it's again, the old kind of Plato concept, you know, the more I know, the less I know. And the more confused I become, but the more enthralled I become, because the whole thing then becomes incredibly exciting.
Oh, it does, yeah.
You know, and you get so, you know, and you and I get chatting, you know, it's this kind of, wow, this is just so extraordinary. Don't just, you know, get stuck down a rut and say, oh, it's one thing or it's not. It's playing with us. It's a much more exciting. And I am sure that in generations to come, they'll look back at us and saying, you know, what was it, the famous Newton quip, you know, and he said, I've been walking along a beach and I've just seen stones and I've looked at them and I've been thinking how wonderful they are, when all around me are the cliffs and the sea and the ocean. It's not the stones you need to be looking at, it's joining the dots. And
Yeah.
they're the same phenomenon. You know, again, a previous guest on the show is a guy called Paulino, and the work he's been doing, again, with entities, with ghosts, with various other things. And he's a very similar thinker to ourselves. And he's arguing, you know, is the secret here possibly plasma? Are they plasma life forms? Are they working along that principle? But we still have to come back to the magical mystery of it all, the imposter, the game playing, the trickster that is involved, as if it's playing with us and having fun with us.
Yes.
And sometimes not even in a malevolent way. You know,
No.
sometimes it is just for the sheer divilment
Yeah.
of doing it. You know,
It's true. Yeah, it is. That's
no, as if we are part of some kind of film show. We're in a kind of Truman show, and the people running the show are just throwing these things in to see what will these strange creatures react to now. Let's throw this into the pot and see what they do.
I mean, what we do see is the transcend of time, and the relation of the front image of this phenomena through eras, and how it significantly changed its perception, befitting just slightly before the action. I mean, for instance, phantom aircraft, the phantom airships, just prior. I mean, if they know what's coming in the very close future, just prior to the manufacture and construction of the very first airships, you know, and we have the ghost rockets of the Second World War era. You know, we have a phenomena that seemingly knows how to present itself befittingly for the era. So I'm wondering where we're going to be in 20 years' time. You know, how we're going to see a significant change in some of the experiences people have, these contact type experiences, because everything is all the kind of the greys at the moment. You get a few of the old reptilians now and again. The Space Brothers have seemed to have left us.
The Nordics don't seem to be very happy with us these days either.
No, yeah, I mean, and even before that, you know, the serpents and all, and so. But you know what, whatever the phenomena represents, you know, always going to tend to do the same thing. And follow that pattern. I will continue to sort of, you know, argue the point that look at it as a whole, and you have to look at it as a whole, because I think it was very cleverly done to compartmentalize us in our research, because the paranormal guys would never deal with the UFO guys.
Yeah.
UFO guys would never deal with the paranormal guys. And then you've got metaphysics and supernatural and spiritual and all these other things you've got to contend with. It's only when you pull down all those walls, like I did.
Yeah, that's the thing I've always argued. Silo thinking. Everybody's in their own silos and everybody's coming to their own conclusions. When the evidence needs to be joined together, there needs to be joined together thinking here of exactly what is taking place. And I very much, you know, your comment about the cultural paralleling that takes place, you know, and again we discussed, you know, the idea that way back in the 1890s with the airship flap in America, and of course the guys were coming down at the UFO out of the airships, and they were saying they were Germans, you know, and they spoke with German accents, and they were human beings. Yeah. And then suddenly, well, lo and behold, you know, it's as if whatever the system is, it knows what we are anticipating and what are our future fears. And I'd never thought about it before, Steve. Your point there was fantastic. Listen to what the phenomenon is telling us, because this is what's going to be happening next.
Exactly.
That's great. I just never thought about that before.
Yeah, it does always precede it. Yeah, absolutely.
Does this deal with your other project they're involved with, Barry Fitzgerald, the thing on Project?
Yeah, well, the Project Doorway goes hand in hand with Project Phenomena, because Project Doorway is about the ancient sites. We're using 2 satellites in orbit, which is looking at magnetic anomalies, around about 200 to 250 MTs, nanoteslas. And the key areas of phenomena, the most significant phenomena that's ever been reported on record. And we're finding correlations in the 90% areas, where there's a correlation between significant paranormal or ufological disturbances and these locations of magnetic positive regions. Also, we're finding that the most materializations of objects, which seemingly more so now being reported, sudden materialization of them as if they're just popping in from somewhere and popping out, are taking places in those locations as well. And those locations are also lower bacterial areas as well, because positive magnetic regions. I found that out actually through positive magnetic doors. These new doors that they're putting into hospitals on recovery wards after operations. Is a positive magnetic seal that goes around the door. And I started questioning some of the doctors and doing a bit of research with Barry in regards why is there a positive magnetic seal around the door? And apparently bacteria doesn't do well crossing it. So and bacteria don't do survive well in areas of magnetic. So we're finding out, well, if these are very potent regions of positive magnetic anomalies, then, and the manifestations and demanifestations do take place there, then the popping in a bacterial safe zone and the popping out in a bacterial safe zone. It could be that the phenomena is simply washing its hands before the operation and afterwards, in the sense of speaking, you know. And there is also effects in the negative, but we find the negative is more a psychological impact on individuals living long term in those areas. This is like minus 250 nanoteslas isn't a good thing. We find it psychological illnesses, stress, suicides, things like that. So there's this a world around us of energies, and I believe some of the phenomena is utilizing some of these energies, and you know, we can track it if that's the case, and we have. Project Doorway is about tracking the phenomena to the point where we could say, okay, we need to be in this location in the desert in the middle of the night at this particular time to witness it. And we go and we witness it. We'd have a close encounter, and we put it to the test, and we were right that you can. And I guess the US government did the same, because they realized this in 82. This is how we're not ahead of the game. They sussed this out in 1982. The US government, they were investigating 7 locations, UFO locations, in connection to positive magnetic regions. So we're catching up. We're playing up, catch up. That this phenomena is also tied to the ground, a lot more tied to the ground than the sky than you can imagine, to be honest with you. The geological connections is quite enormous, as well as the oceans around the world. So, which we thought it goes hand in hand with Project Phenomena, Project Doorway, because one aspect we're dealing with some type of intelligence. In Project Doorway, again, we're dealing with that same intelligence, but from just a different subject. It's the same intelligence. I mean, we can go into caves underground and communicate with something beyond a granite wall, and we don't know what that something is, and we don't understand the language, what it is, but it's the same source. It's just different places in different, what we might consider, oh, that's more ufological. Oh, is it? Or is it more paranormal? We've made these categories to put them in there. Get rid of them all. Get rid of all the categories. That's what I say. And just list what the phenomena is, haven't you? And you'll find that they're all interconnected.
Well, I was thinking immediately there, you know, the work of Paul Devereaux and his work on Earthlights,
Yeah.
you know, as well. You know, that there are linkages here in so many areas. And again, as I've said many, many times on this show, you know, the idea is that sometime we're all going to get our heads together, and Sarah's going to invite us all down to this huge event down in Hastings, and we're all going to sit around and we're going to create such an egregore that we're going to crack it all open, and we're going to understand it all. By the way, just to let you know that our mutual friend Alan Bates has just said, "Best wishes, Steve. Enjoyed our shows we did on Radio City many moons ago." Yes, Alan will be involved in Wednesday shows here as well, so that's linkages within linkages. Now, I'm aware we're coming towards the end. Sarah, I'll pull you in again. Any other comments, points you'd like to make?
There are a couple of things that you brought up, Steve, that I thought were really interesting. And what you were talking about with regards to amplification of sounds in particular really reminded me of my own experiences of dreaming, and how you experience the same kind of amplification of external sensory input that gets incorporated into a dream scene, becomes much more loud and dramatic. And I wonder whether the receivers, if you like, if they are the people experiencing this phenomena, might be in a particular state themselves that's conducive to picking up this kind of phenomena. So
it could be. I think what's interesting on that part is that our recording devices, we're talking a particular incidents, and on this one of many incidents, but as an example, the recording equipment which is set up downstairs has sensitive microphones, which is listening to the house. If this incident took place probably one of the furthest places from the microphone, upstairs, we were surprised that we could have got any recording of it, but we heard it very loud, and the recording measured it, that loudness, the decibel, and it couldn't have been that, because under normal replication, you're going up there and doing the same fact, the recording wouldn't have picked it up. It had to be amplified for us not only to hear it, but for it to be left as some form of evidence on the recording device. So yeah, absolutely a manipulation of sound, I would say, in that environment. Just as some people have had those experiences with cryptids and paranormal stuff, the amplification of sound. They've had it during UFO experiences as well. They said it was so loud, we couldn't understand why is it so loud.
Well, I can really resonate with this idea of that silence preceding the loudness as well. That kind of reduction of any kind of background noise, or even awareness for that sort of moment preceding the event. And one of the other things I wanted to talk about with regards to this idea of non-local consciousness, and perhaps an idea as well of information being matter of some sort, and that, I was reading an article recently about how they believe that people are developing Tourette's syndrome as a result of watching TikTok videos about people with Tourette's. And I think that it's possible that in a different way, perhaps, if we consider that information has matter, that we can transmit fear, and we can transmit anxiety, and we can transmit mental illnesses even via media and using information.
Absolutely.
So we've created an egregore out of the internet, and
we have. I've created an egregore myself in the past. I joined a social experiment in 1996, I think it was. We made a house haunted. It wasn't haunted, but we made it haunted through the power of belief, prior knowledge, and expectation. Over a period of several months, we made that place haunted. So it becomes something through the power of belief, and I think people don't realize how much power we have in regarding bending and manipulating our reality. Not breaking it, but we can bend it.
And I think it's a drip effect as well, because you look at this kind of fanaticism for dystopian futures that is the mainstay of Netflix, and how much TV and how many films we watch about viruses, pandemics, zombie apocalypses, and dystopian futures, and we've created something in that that fits our future vision, and that me and Anthony have said on many occasions on this show that it's the responsibility of artists and creatives to create beautiful visions of the future.
It is. I mean, for
inhabit those if we imagine them.
There are people out there which advanced programmers for computers and stuff will say that there are so many elements of the reality that we know is identical in the process of how programs work, and how ideas programs get to change, to trial things, and go off in different tangents, just to experience something which hasn't experienced. Programs do this, especially AI programs. We're seeing a lot of this now in AI computers, and when I'm just going back to that cracking little bit of information that came out of that computer. It's a single source that has the capabilities of physiological constructs. That blew my mind. I don't know what the hell it's supposed to mean, but it's all part and parcel of the journey, I guess.
It does seem to be. Steve, okay, we're coming towards the end of what has been fascinating exchange of information. The information you've presented, I am sure that people will watch this show over and over again just because of so much of the information. And it would be wonderful at some stage in the future, when and if you are allowed to release any of the information, to maybe hear some of these recordings on a future show, or
Oh,
maybe
recordings, yeah, I do have
it
them.
would be wonderful. Maybe you and I can talk about this, to do maybe a special where we can listen to collectively the recordings that you're allowed to release, to
Yeah.
just listen to them and see some of the things that you've recorded as well. And it would be wonderful if you were willing to share those with us, because that would make
Oh, yeah.
extraordinarily interesting information.
We have some
So,
interesting things. Yeah, of course.
okay, great. Well, that's a plan for the future. Okay, so Steve, how do people contact you? Can you tell us a little bit about, your website and everything else, and your magazine, and everything, so that the
Yeah,
guys can
sure.
do.
Well, I have my own personal website, which is stevemera.com, which is just basically about the work I've been involved in and how to contact me. I do a lot of lectures around the world, so I have a lecturing service. So I've just been a spokesman for a lot of different shows, including Hammer House, which I used to love the old Hammer horror films.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Hammer Productions now is its new name, should we say? Because it doesn't just deal with horror anymore. So interestingly enough, so I do a lot of spokesman work and things like that. So that's mostly for my main website. For the magazine, which is free, it's phenomenamagazine.co.uk. All the archive is on there as well, so you can actually have a blast and download every single magazine we've ever done. And we've been doing it now for about 15 years, so it's quite a lot. It's a monthly magazine as well. It comes out absolutely every month. And if you speak a different language, not a problem. They're available free, again, for download in other areas of the world, in Spanish, for example. All the details are there on the website to download them, or even to submit, or if you want to obtain information. Zohar is the YouTube. We deal with YouTube management services of these particular subjects. It is the one place you can go to on the YouTube where we just specialize in this subject alone, from all over the world. So we network with people all over the world. We get new information coming forward. We deal with events all over the world as well. And to find out more about that, you can go to zoharstargate.com, and it'll list about our videos, which are available freely to watch across YouTube. And of course, we have our own events, which is the Awakenings Expo. This year, it's going to be, for next year, we have an event taking place in Blackpool known as Chariots of the Gods, which goes hand in hand with the new construction of a theme park that we're involved in Blackpool. So it's exciting times. Lots of things happening actually at the moment. So, but the main thing is it's all about distribution of information at no cost, and that's what we believe. People need to be educated. Why should there be a big cost on it? It doesn't necessarily need to be. So you can find out all these things. They are available on the internet as much as we possibly can anyway. So
Stephen, can I just ask, this theme park, is it the Eric von Daniken one in Blackpool that you're working on?
it is.
Oh,
you know about it?
Yeah, because I do an Egyptology lecture club online, and Egyptologists obviously don't generally think kindly of Eric von Daniken. And I really wanted to get the two sides together to have a conversation about, because I actually meet so many Egyptologists that tell me they were initially inspired to get into Egyptology by reading things like Eric von Daniken or Graham Hancock. And then when they get into the academic stuff, they kind of forget about all of that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it would be really great if you had a show where you had people that were into really kind of out there ideas and didn't agree with one another, but didn't just call each other idiots all the time. I think would be excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what we're finding now, obviously, within the subjects of ancient, it's not doing any justice when we have some TV shows out there, which, just are a bit crazy. But, the fundamentals are that there is evidence around the world of things we cannot explain. And there are numerous different theories. Eric von Daniken's is just one of many. But the theme park is generated at a lot of the science as well. There's a science centre there, and also about our ancient past and the ancient wonders. Though we're not saying that there's significant, absolute theories supporting them, but we're giving people the option usually, and we want to give the younger generation a chance to be able to, to explore those areas. So what we do is people can't travel all over the world to go. So, well, I have some, or many of them, but a lot of people don't ever get the chance to travel around all these places. So we bring them to Blackpool so they can go. There'll be a pyramids and things in there, so they can go there and learn about different things. So it should be really, it's very interactive.
Kids, I would be my fantasy place to have gone when I was a kid. So, whether or not they hold those opinions and ideas for the rest of their life, inspiration is more important, I think, than anything else.
I think it is. I mean, even I can say that a lot of my interest was generated when the Eric von Daniken, when the Daily Mirror took the Eric von Daniken Chariots of the Gods book and actually published it over a period of 2 or 3 weeks. And it really fascinated me, which then got me into the work of Brinsley Le Portranche and various other people, which was the start in my own interest as well. And I'm sure there's an awful lot of us were intrigued by that. We don't take it fully literally, but we are aware that there's more to ancient civilizations than simply that they were more primitive than we were, because self-evidently they weren't. And of course, the thing is, with the work you're doing, Steve, and having visited your studios up there, you've got some state-of-the-art stuff here. You're not just playing at it; you're really seriously doing it and seriously investing huge amounts of money in stuff out. And
we have to. Unfortunately, a lot of the equipment that we needed wasn't built.
You're building it yourself.
So we now have time displacement meters. We have a number of these, which have been manufactured, and they measure from the probe and 150 foot away to the unit, and it looks at differentials between the probe and the unit. And in a number of ancient sites, only a small amount, we have differentials. We shouldn't have differentials. There might be only 18 milliseconds, but we shouldn't have any differentials. We're finding differentials in some of these ancient sites, and we're also finding, we've got it on film, a voltage being pushed out under solstice of all times, being pushed out from some of these ancient sites. It might be only a small amount, maybe only put 11 volts, but shouldn't be there. So there's still things to learn.
Well, what we need to do, Steve, is you and I can arrange. We'll try and get another show, a special show early in the new year, if we can pull together all the kind of sights and sounds that you've got there. I'm sure we could make it an absolutely extraordinary show, and one that I think we could really build up anticipation for, which could then also run parallel with the release of the films that you've done with me. It could be very, very interesting. I think
absolutely, yeah.
We're gonna create something extraordinary here.
Forward to that. Absolutely.
Steve, thank you very much for a fantastic.
You're welcome.
My head's buzzing now. There's so many things I'm thinking about, which is brilliant. And as always, thanks to Sarah.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you,
Sarah.
And everything, and to everybody out there, we'll be going live again on Wednesday. Where we have a guest that we missed out on last week, Malcolm Robinson, who will be joining us from Scotland, where Sarah and I will be involved, and Alan Bates will be joining us as well for what could be another fascinating show. But wow, this is one to follow, isn't it? Absolutely fantastic. Steve, as always, wonderful to be associated with you and your incredible work. So thank you very much. And everybody else listening out there, thank you very much for spending part of your afternoon with us. This will be uploaded onto my YouTube site, and I'll send all the links. This will be uploaded tomorrow, and the recording of it will be there permanently to watch for free. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again all on Wednesday, hopefully. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Steve. Thank you very much.